Hello and welcome to the Data Governance Podcast, Season 10, Episode 5. Now, we're nearly halfway through the season, and sadly, this is the last in the mini-series that Jamie Knowles of ER Studio and I have been doing on all things data product. And this week, we are joined by the amazing Dr. Hans Lux, and we're going to start thinking about how do data products and data mesh fit in with data warehousing, which is perhaps a more traditional way of doing our data analytics that we're perhaps more familiar, more comfortable with. So let's dive in and see what they have to say about it. Today's episode is brought to you by ER Studio, the trusted name in data modeling. Just like building a home, managing data architecture is impossible without a blueprint. ER Studio is your guide to clarity, collaboration, and compliance. Built for data professionals, ER Studio provides the essential tools to visualize, document, and manage your enterprise data. Visit erstudio.com to learn more how ER Studio integrates all your source systems, ensures governance at every level, streamlines data sharing across your organization, and even automatically converts your logical data models into physical models. This week, it's the final episode in our mini-series with ER Studio. And as you know, if you've been listening to the last few, Jamie and I have been diving into all things data products. And we're ending it this week with a look at data products and data warehousing, which I am really excited about. And I know it sounds sad, but I started my whole career being a project manager for data warehousing. So I've got a soft spot for data warehouses, and I was a little bit sad that, whilst it's exciting, we've got these exciting new data products, but what does this mean for our data warehouses? And, do they have a relationship? So I think it's fabulous. Jamie's back again, so always good to see you, Jamie. And this week, we are joined by the amazing Dr. Hans Lux. And he's been fascinated by the power of good data since his PhD, which he did in quantitative research, test and measurement. And Hans has focused his career on data. He's designed and built high-performance analytic data systems ranging from data warehousing, BI, and data mesh, which is a much hot topic these days. And I think Hans has created advanced models typically for very large, very complex projects and data strategies for large firms. So it just felt like you'd be the perfect person to round off this season, or series rather, and discuss data products in the context of data warehousing. So welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for the kind introduction. I think it's probably more accurate to say I stumbled into data more or less by accident, and then found data to be a rather fascinating topic by its own, and it just kept drawing me in. So it wasn't so much at focusing on it, but kind of being focused on it. But I think that happens to a lot of people because data is what's left over and everything else is gone, and so it's actually quite interesting. So, but anyways, thanks for the kind introduction.
I love that. And I think it's true. Most of us got into it totally by accident. So I think this is really good. So before we start quizzing you about what data product and data warehousing got to do with each other, I thought it might be useful because we've been doing this over 4 weeks now. Jamie, I just kind of wanted to ask you, perhaps you could do just a little bit of a quick recap on what we've learned about data products so far. So perhaps if somebody's listening to this and hasn't listened to the previous ones yet, they can still carry on and listen to this conversation before they go back and catch up.
No problem. So it's all about having decentralized domain teams of subject matter experts that are driving things. We talked about a need for a mechanism to ensure standardization across all of our products and across our domains. And we talked about how that can be solved by good data architecture. Very good. And I think that one of the big things we talked about is it's got to be business driven. Don't let this be an IT driven project, which I guess brings us on to this part, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think by some measures that, once we start talking about data warehousing, it gets a little bit more technical. But I think as a data governance person, you really need to understand, this side of things. So, which is why I thought it was a really important topic to cover. So I'm going to ask you a first question to get us set up and into this now, Hans. And obviously, we hear a lot of people talking about data mesh these days when they use the term to mean that they're now embracing data products. So that from, perhaps the lay persons, and I'm not hugely technical, sounds like perhaps we're abandoning our data warehouse and we don't need them anymore. So how does data mesh impact, data warehouses and delivering our data that way?
Well, I mean, it's replacing it and it isn't replacing it. It's one of those things. Um, what data mesh really tries to do is to go against monolithic architectures and monolithic approaches. And so they say, well, there is a bottleneck if I have a centralized data team. And so the bottleneck now creates a lot of mayhem and troubles. If I need more data, new data, fresh data, slightly changed data. But what she also says is that the data quality, or implicitly says the data quality isn't there because a data product is essentially a data set with quality attached to it in a rather significant way. Now, as the data meshes are being built, a lot of those are technical implementations, very often with the push of the whole thing to the cloud. And what gets forgotten that in the end, it's still big fat federated data warehouse, although on a distributed architecture and with the pieces delivered by the domains less dependent on one another than it used to be. But if you take something like Data Vault, it's a very similar idea where you say, well, fine, you push those things in separate pieces and you push it in a way that if something gets loaded, it doesn't break. If something it ultimately depends on isn't loaded first. There's much more crossover than meets the eye. In the end, data mesh is sold as something new. So it's this famous inflection point, everything gets to this thing and now, oh, we can't go like this anymore. And now we have to have revolutionary change. Well, everybody who's been in computing for more than 6 years will know that there's no such thing as revolutionary change. Everything builds and everything built before. And it's just a question, do we drop certain things or don't we? And I think we should be quite aware what we drop and why. And so what the data mesh really doesn't talk much about is the whole integration of it. I think that's one of the real weaknesses, and some of the underlying pieces, Eric Evans' domain-driven design, actually is much richer in that regard. And so one of the things we had in the previous webinar, we said really you also need to do your modeling in a domain-based way, and that changes rather significantly how we have been doing modeling. So that might be revolutionary if you wish. We go from an enterprise model to a set of domain models. But in the end, you still need to have the modeling. Just as data governance becomes, if it's not already a big topic, because if you parcel out the responsibility for data to the domains, you need to know what you parcel out. So that's again where the model and the data element definitions go in. But then you need to have governance to say, well, you're responsible for this, Frank's responsible for that, and Mary's responsible for that. Well, how are you going to do this without governance? Good luck.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I've been a great fan of that. I love how you describe a data warehouse or data mesh as a federated data warehouse. I think I wish somebody had said that to me when they first started talking about it. I think that makes it sound a lot easier to get your head around.
It could be more, but if I talk about highly structured data from my internal operational systems, then whether you like it or not, that's going to be the outcome plus minus. If you talk about sourcing data sets about the weather, stock data, whatever, well, they could have very freestanding products. And I think there the paradigm works much, much better. So it really depends what you have. But I think where a lot of the data mesh teams struggle, they say, okay, now we kick all those pesky data warehousing people out. And then they say, well, actually, now we're dealing with the same problems people used to deal. Well, maybe we ought to bring them back in, but ship them all to the domain. And so I think there's a lot of ideology which really is going to create a lot of damage. Whereas being respectful of what was there and building upon it might be a much, 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 much better approach.
So are you advocating more of perhaps like a hybrid? We still need our data warehousing, and some data is more
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
But we can create our data products where the data is appropriate for that.
No, actually, I think for structured data, you will end up with a hybrid because you can say, well, I take care of the ETL, I put people in the previous stage, but at some point, data need to work together with other data. And without at least virtually or conceptually having a data warehouse, it's not going to work. I mean, if the technology supports it, you could have this jotted down in all sorts of different things. That's fine. But some layer needs to bring it together. And that overarching layer will create a virtual data warehouse, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. No, and that makes perfect sense to me because, I mean, I think probably in the first one of this little series, Jamie and I, we were talking, weren't we, about the fact that not all data is suitable for data products. And I think you've just, articulated that better in the context of data warehouses, is getting people to understand that, we can't put all of our data into data products.
Perhaps not suitable, not for the data mesh, but for the way data mesh is predominantly understood. And I think those are two different things. Because again, I mean, Degani in her book, she proposes a lot of really interesting things. And a lot of what she proposes is applicable to any data set. For example, the way she describes quality, I think that should be taken out and get a lot of emphasis. I think it's the most important thing of the book in a way. That gets soundly ignored because data quality hurts. So I say, okay, fine, we have other people deal with it. In the meantime, I do this. Well, okay, so now you know where this is going to go.
Sadly, yes, I agree with you. I think everybody wants doing data quality is the inconvenient part, isn't it?
Exactly. Well, I do the convenient part. The rest is like a hot potato, just toss it on and say, oh, well, this is not my problem. Oh, yes, it is your problem. And I think this is the one thing, if I had the power, I would say everybody's bonus depends on the data quality. And you cannot possibly get the bonus if anything in your purview doesn't have the data quality, then it will change.
Oh, I'd love to see an organization do that. That would be amazing, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, if people say data quality is important, it's okay. Are you willing to stake the bonus on it? And if the answer is no, they say, no, actually, you're lying. You don't care about data quality. Because management gets what management pays. It's as simple as that. So don't tell me it's important if you don't put the bonus on it.
I'm gonna make this a sound snippet and take it to my clients' hands. That is such a great way of articulating it. I love that. So it sounds to me like you've been talking about perhaps different options on how we would do data mesh, data warehouses. So if I've understood you correctly, and you can then explain properly to me if I've got it wrong, we've got like a totally siloed approach per domain, and that's when you were talking about your independent data, like the weather data or stock data or something. We can build our data mesh as it's, exciting new technology and just do everything federated. But actually, we probably need a bit of a hybrid.
Well, so first of all, I think you got this spot on. I wanted to say you got this totally wrong, but I really can't because you got it really right. Just to tease you. So really, the challenge is this. If I imagine you bring different data sets together and you don't have something like an operational data store like in Inland style or a data vault like in a Linstead style, which are all kind of permutations on the theme really, then you don't really know whether you can combine this data. Surely you can, but you do a lot of testing and you do a lot of verification and you do a lot of forensic analysis. And then if everything checks out, you do your analysis and there you go. Well, the problem with this approach is that you spend about 95% on forensic analysis and testing and 5% on your real job, which is not a particularly smart way to use resources. If you now say, I do a data mesh with those data products, I need to guarantee that I can put it together. Now, what Degani says is what she calls a polytheme, which is basically matching on common names almost. And I say, well, fine, if I see a product ID here and I see a product ID there, well, probably can relate the one to the other. But I don't know, are those parallel data sets with gaps? I don't know, is this a primary foreign key relationship, or is this maybe spurious and it's just called the same, but it ain't. So if I don't have that, I have a guessing game. Well, that can't be really the improvement that she calls for. Now, if I go back to Evans, Evans says I could actually keep the models, the domain models synchronized. Well, you know, that becomes a fool's errand unless the moment the third domain comes in. Or you can say what she says, I do translations. Well, that's also a fool's errand because once I have 4 domains, I have a many-to-many consolidation, which is inefficient. Now we know this already from canonical models. The answer is you have a common definition and you map to that. I mean, this is also how language processing works. Nobody does a language engine language to language. It goes to some ideal language. And then from that it goes out. Then you can bring a new language in no time flat. Whereas otherwise, if you Swahili, whatever, then you say, okay, so now I have to have a translation to English, I have another one to French, another one to Italian, I have another one to Wolof, yada, yada, yada. Well, I mean, that's not efficient. It's the same here. And so what Evans has in his consolidation mechanisms is, which he calls a core. I think he calls it a core. Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, I may have forgotten the right word. But in essence, you now have a consolidated tier, which is very, very skinny, which is effectively the primary foreign key pairs, possibly a little bit, a few data elements on top of it to make it easy to use. And then you have the domains, which is everything else. That's probably the minimum you need to do to make this work. Now, if you do that, that's a very different story from having independent data products where I hope with some polyseams that the stuff matches. And I think that is really the gap. And the very interesting thing is that she bases this on Eric Evans, but she doesn't use the paradigm within Eric Evans that doesn't makes it work.
I think you're saying here, Hans, is this is all about architecture, isn't it? Good modeling and good architecture at the same time.
It's all about good modeling, good architecture, of course. And the data mesh projects will fight you tooth and nail because I don't want a data model, I don't want architecture, I don't want this. And say, well, okay, fine, you know. Kids don't want the healthy food either. I mean, okay, fine, get sick at your peril if that's what you wish. But if you bring me in and ask how do you make it work, then I say, well, you know, I have really bad news for you. You'll have to have some sort of modeling. But yes, the model needs to be simplified as much as possible. The model needs to be reduced as much as possible. And if Jamie comes and says, you need an enterprise model, you say, no, Jamie, that time is over. You're dating yourself. You actually need to have domain models that together at the end create the enterprise model. That's the big shift.
Love it. Modeling. Modern modeling. Yes, there we go.
Modeling. Yeah. You're making me feel good because as part of doing data governance, I always love doing conceptual data models and I do it per function, but that in effect often turns out to be domain modeling at very, very high
That's exactly what it
level.
Is. That's exactly what it is. The challenge is, though, you cannot sell the conceptual, illogical, and a physical model anymore. No. So if people don't want you to do the modeling, you say, well, fine, I have bad news for you. Which one do you want to hear first? And they say, well, you know, the bad news. Okay, fine. You will have to do some modeling. But we don't want to do modeling. I said, okay, fine. Here's the good news. We've now slimmed this down to the bare minimum. You model just in the conceptual, on the logical model. If you need to pull out a conceptual, something like ES Studio allows you to do this. So then you see the conceptual model, which is very, well, conceptual. And if you need the physical model, well, you generate those also. So now, yes, you have to do modeling, but you knock it down at so little that it's actually palatable. And I think that's really the message where you say, yeah, okay, who wants to do 3-tier modeling? I mean, sorry, that didn't ever really work that well, quite honestly. So, I mean, I remember I always modeled on a logical model and said, oh, you know what, that's wrong. I said, yeah, but I know what I'm doing, so I can do it. And I mean, a little arrogance helps sometimes, but that's how I could sell it.
Yeah, no, and I think you need somebody who's confident to guide and facilitate it, because if you say if you're going to do business domains, you need to talk to business users.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you're talking language that they don't get, you've got to be able to facilitate them through that. So I love that. So it's sounding like you're making me get perhaps a bit more happy that data products can live
I'm glad to
in
make you happy.
happy
Well, it was easy.
conjunction with our data warehouses. So the data warehouse is not dead. Perhaps the one I delivered 30 odd years ago is, but others will survive and everything. But you're making it sound like there are a number of pitfalls that people perhaps already have been falling into. So what do you think people need to do to avoid these pitfalls and problems?
On the data, on the data mesh, or on the data governance, or the combination of data mesh and data
Probably
governance?
the combination.
The combination of the two. Okay, so I think the biggest risk is not to understand the breakdown of your essential data into the domains.
Mm.
That's because quite often, I mean, there are some domains already, because IT is being split up into certain things. But if that's not done cleanly, if it's not understood how it hangs together, then you will still have redundancy and so on. And best example is actor data. I mean, actor is one of the biggest, the most important set of data. Well, then some fight you ready to say, well, but it's different because I have customers, I have this, I have this. And then they say, there's no such thing as a customer, the people who are in customer relationship. I mean, it's already from the conceptual expression misleading. But then you have people who do things. And so now you will have some people who manage those people if you don't have master data management. You have some people who manage the people who are predominantly employees. You have other people who manage the people who are predominantly customers, and so on, and so on, and so on. So now you have a vertical lineup of actors, and you need to understand who's responsible for which set. And depending what kind of actors there are, what functions they're in, you may stick some extra information on, because you know more about employees than you know about customers. And so now you have to sort out with good governance who's responsible for what, how the whole thing gets sorted out with the discrepancies, who, if I have multiple ones, who is the primary domain, and which domains have veto rights, and so on. Well, it becomes actually quite involved governance play.
Yeah.
Now, if you have mature governance, it's easy. If you know governance, people don't understand that you need it. And so now you have a real challenge. Now, the clever thing is to say, okay, I really don't have governance because of, let's say, I'm not in a regulated industry. I could now use this to bring a very lightweight governance into it, and now get two for the price of one. The bad approach is to do it completely separate. Now you get half to the price of two. And so it's the integration of the whole thing. But if you have a technically focused mesh, then it'll be very difficult to sell that until they really get bloody noses. Then they might say, well, actually, if you could get some people know what they're doing in this space, then we can continue focusing on the technical stuff and actually do this work we don't want to touch anyways. Then you get a very happy interaction, because then the parties know what they do, and then they understand that you help them, and that's good. But I think that is one of the really potential pitfalls in this on the governance side.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's possibly me being biased, but I think that's where data governance comes in, because it helps define the roles and responsibilities, who's responsible for what.
Does. Of course it does. Why not use it?
Absolutely. So
but you need data governance that is based on a very firm model. Otherwise, it will not work.
Oh, I'm totally with you 100% there, Hans. It's, we've got to be clear what we're doing. So we have been having a fascinating conversation, but we're rapidly running out of time. So I just always like to kind of leave my listeners with some, key things to go away and consider. So well, I'll ask you both, but perhaps start with you, Hans. What would you think the key takeaways are from our discussion today that we'd want the listeners to go away and take with them?
Of our discussion was a bit from the last one. The data mesh, when you augment it with best practices of data architecture, analytical data processing, and data governance, can be an incredible game changer. That's one takeaway. If you do it in isolation, it's probably not going to be a game changer and cost you a lot of money. I think that's one of the key pieces. From that follows that those four traits, if you will, really ought to be the best friends, because they augment one another. And if they work together like that, then, as I said, you get a really great situation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hans. Jamie, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, as Hans says, great opportunity here for quality data delivered efficiently with governance baked in at the start. But we need a collaboration of teams and tools. It's got to be driven by the subject matter experts in the business, supported by data architects doing just enough modeling, not too much, delivered by well-planned IT that can be centered around a data warehouse.
Absolutely. So it sounds like, if done well, we're at, we could be on the brink of something really exciting and something that really be very valuable for our organizations. But we have to work in a joined up way. And so speak actually 3 people across 3 different disciplines. And we're all strongly urging you to go and work together. So
Yes.
Thank you so much, both of you. It has been a fascinating conversation.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Our pleasure. My pleasure.
I am sure you'll agree that Hans is such an interesting chap, and I love his way of things. And as I said at the beginning of that, I got into data governance after being a project manager for data warehouse implementation. So I've always had a soft spot for data warehouses, and I suppose a part of me was sad that perhaps their demise was imminent, but I am really relieved to hear that they're not. And I do hope you found that really useful, and so important to understand that all these things have to be joined up. We don't do data products in isolation. We need to consider all the moving parts. So that concludes our little focus on all things data products. I do hope you found it useful, because it is such a hot topic now. And I think we can really make sure that our organizations do this properly and add value. So data products are done and dusted for now. I'm sure we will come back to them in the future. But we want to have a change of topic, and something that surprisingly I haven't covered on a podcast today is the topic of data lineage. And so I am really thrilled that somebody I've known for many years now, Steve Nee, is going to be joining me on the podcast next week. And we're going to have a talk about data lineage and why it's important and probably what it is. So I do hope you can join me then.